2020 was supposed to bring something a little bit better, a little bit different for the Seattle Seahawks. First, you had the big trade, giving up multiple future first-round picks to bring in defensive stalwart, the safety, Jamal Adams from the New York Jets. He was going to come in and be an impact player and a difference maker on the defense and get you a little bit closer maybe to the Legion of Boom days. And Russell Wilson was going to cook all year, and he was going to be an MVP candidate, and skip-de-skip, whoop-de-woo, and all that jazz. And early on, it didn't look so bad for the Seahawks. Got off to a 5-0 start, and certainly there was a lot of talk about let Russ cook. Russ is cooking, hyping him up as an MVP candidate. And you're looking at the Seattle team, 5-0, big trade for Adams, Russell Wilson playing really well, another year of development out of DK Metcalf, and maybe you're thinking, hey, this Seattle team could be a contender. And, you know, they did win their division, which was a tough division, one of the toughest in football. They won it with a 12-4 record. So the Seahawks, all in all, ended up having a really good regular season, had a home playoff game. But then they just face-planted in the wild card round at home against the Rams. Like, Russ was really bad in that game. And their defense certainly wasn't stellar, but, you know, tried, I guess you could say. But it was kind of a disappointing, pathetic performance there, which kind of matched the larger trend of what you saw with the Seahawks throughout the first half of the year especially. But for a season where you make the big move to go and get a Jamal Adams, like, you're saying basically that you're going all in. You're also saying you don't know what the fuck you're doing in the draft, which recent years when you look at John Schneider and Pete Carroll, you can say, you know what? They don't. But when you make a big move like that, you got to get closer. Like, that's one of those we're all in type of deals. And not only did you not get closer, you technically got further away because at least last year you went into Philly in the wild card round and you beat the Eagles. You knocked Wentz out. Jadeveon Clowney did in the first half, and then you held off Josh McCown and the Eagles and you won. And then you went up to Lambeau in the divisional round and played them tough. This year, you're supposed to get an MVP season out of Russell Wilson. You didn't get it. Jamal Adams is going to be the big difference maker that makes all the difference in the world for this defense, or at least enough. You know, and you end up going one round less in the playoffs. So less than ideal result for the Seahawks, and certainly not what they envisioned coming into the season. Now, offensively, you know, Russell Wilson still had a really good year. Like, I know I'm giving him some shit, but you know, he's still an elite quarterback. He had over 4,200 yards passing. He had 40 touchdown passes. You know, over 500 rushing yards. Like, Russell Wilson is that dude. You know, he's a stud. He's an elite quarterback in the league. Notwithstanding his really, really awkwardly bad performance in that wild card round against the Rams. And it's interesting to me, when you talk about Russell Wilson, there are times I watch him, and he's spectacular and he's phenomenal. One of the best deep ball throwers I've ever seen. His ability to improvise and keep plays alive is a great strength of his. But at times, it's also his greatest weakness, because there are games you watch Russell Wilson, they don't happen all the time. But he will have some games that he looks like shit. Like, everybody's going to have bad games. It's just the nature of the beast. But when I say he looks bad, he will have those games where he is absolutely, absolutely god-awful. And sometimes at the worst particular time. DK Metcalf in year 2 had a big year, over 80 catches, over 1,300 receiving yards and 10 touchdowns. Tyler Lockett was a good number 2 complement. He finished with over 1,000 yards receiving. So you certainly had enough weapons in the passing game for the Seahawks offense. The problem was defense. Like, you brought in Jamal Adams, and to be fair, in his 12 games or so that he played, he had 9.5 sacks, but you basically traded away 2 first-round picks for the in-the-box safety. It really didn't have a ton of impact on your defense overall. In the first half of the year, they struggled mightily. They got a little bit better as the season progressed, that's for sure, but they still finished second to last in the league against the pass and 22nd in total yards allowed. And, you know, when you were talking about that wild card round, that should have been a game where that Seahawks defense should have been able to step up and totally shut down the Rams, like make them a non-factor. And they didn't do that enough. It's not like the Rams exploded offensively, but they should have been able to still find a way to beat the Rams, and they didn't do that. And when you talk about a team that's invested a lot in the defense over the years, a team with a defensive-minded head coach at Pete Carroll, a team that just invested 2 future first-round picks into bringing in a guy like Jamal Adams to follow up the first-round pick they spent on a guy like Brooks, who, we'll see what he becomes. That's a very, very disappointing performance. And I think that's part of the problem here for Seattle. Like, as you look at them, it speaks to, if you have a quality coach and you have a quality quarterback, you can always kind of be in the mix. And that can help you overcome quite a bit. But it's not going to help you overcome everything. And when you look at the Seahawks in recent years, their draft record is not great. Like 2016, sure, they got Jerron Reed out of that draft in the second round from Alabama, but Jermaine Ifedi was their first rounder, and he was a bust. You look at 2017, sure, they got Shaq Griffin and Ethan Posich and Chris Carson late, but Malik McDowell was their first pick in round 2 after they had traded back, and he was a total complete bust. He never even played it down in the league, I don't believe. And that's only back in 2017. Like, you look at 2018, they took Rashad Penny in the first round. He's been a bust. 2019, they took L.J. Collier in the first round. He hadn't really done shit. Marquise Blair in the second round, the safety from Utah. He hasn't done shit. So, yeah, it's great that they'll find guys like a Jerron Reed in the second round or a DK Metcalf in the second round. But they have way too many damn busts on those big, notable marquee picks. And at some point in time, those chickens come home to roost. And you're now looking at a situation where it's bad enough with what happened to that Super Bowl against the Patriots, the throw on the crossing route instead of trying to pound it in with Marshawn Lynch. While they lost the opportunity to win back-to-back Super Bowls, and you feel like they've never been the same because they never really have, the reality is they're going to end up wasting the rest of Pete Carroll's tenure and the rest of Russell Wilson's career as long as he's there in Seattle because they can't build a championship team around those guys. And that's a shame. What's worse? Never having a franchise quarterback or never winning the Super Bowl? Or actually having the most important piece and only being able to win one where you potentially should have won several more? Like, really think about that. Yes, it's great you got the one, but if you never expect a championship, your team is living up to expectations. If you're a Seahawks fan, realistically, you would have expected to have more than one Lombardi trophy from this Russell Wilson, Pete Carroll run. You would expect to probably have 3 or more. You've got 1. And you are no closer to getting to that second one. You're just toiling around wild card divisional round stuff. You just don't have enough. And part of the problem, again, is all of these big notable misses that they've had in the draft in recent years. So you look at them in this offseason, it also manifests itself because they don't have a ton of cap space. So not only do you not have a first-round pick this year because of that Jamal Adams trade, you don't have a ton of cap space to plug in some other holes in the roster, and you got to make some big decisions on guys like Chris Carson and Shaq Griffin and Quentin Dunbar, Benson Mayowa. You look at some of those guys, and you say you're probably not going to be able to retain all of them. If the cap number's a little bit higher, like maybe you have $25 million in cap space, you make some other moves, you get a little more flexibility, you keep some of them. But even in that case, like, you don't need to just retain guys, you need to retain key guys and bring in more. And you're not going to have a ton of cap space to do that, and you don't have all of the draft pick capital necessary. And you have some sizable, significant needs, certainly on the defensive side of the ball. Like, they need some guys that can get some heat on the opposing quarterbacks. I think they need some secondary help, particularly at corner opposite of Shaq Griffin. Because, bear in mind, again, Jamal Adams, the way he was kind of deployed and used, when you're talking about a safety that has 9.5 sacks, that's sounds pretty awesome until you realize, well, that means he probably wasn't in coverage a whole bunch. It means you were probably using him as an in-the-box strong safety, which means you gave up 2 first-round picks for an in-the-box strong safety that didn't have a ton of impact on your defense. And that's very true. And then, still I think they need some help on offense. Like, I would still like to see them get a better weapon at the tight end position, especially with Metcalf and Lockett at wide receiver. It'd be really nice to have that third guy, kind of intermediate target over the middle that could cause some mismatches on defenses, keep the safeties a little more honest so they wouldn't shade DK Metcalf over the top as often. Run offensive line for them is like a constant, continuous need. And especially if they don't retain Chris Carson, you're probably going to need to invest in a running back somewhat early, which makes that Rashad Penny pick, that bust, all the more painful. But yeah, you look at the Seahawks team, it's weird. Because they don't suck. They certainly don't. And you expect him to be in the mix next year. But what are they going to do to get them over the hump? Bobby Wagner's another year older. Pete Carroll's another year older. Hell, Russell Wilson's another year older. Like, most of the team that you have now was not around for the Legion of Boom years, not around for the championship year. And I just don't see how this team's going to get a whole lot better. Like, they've got their work ahead of them, but they got to figure out something. And, you know, if you're a Seahawks fan, I imagine you got to feel some trepidation. Whereas on the one hand, and it's understandable, you're like, well, they don't know what the fuck they're doing with their first-round picks anyway, so they might as well trade it away. I get that, and I understand that. I don't totally think that's a bad thing. And I talked about the trade at the time, like, if they were going to do it, this is the right time to do it. But now you look at it, how much confidence do you have that they can bring in the right pieces via the draft, via the offseason, via trade, free agency, whatever, to help get this team over the hump? Because there is a bit of a gap there. And they need to better Russell-proof this team, meaning that if he has a bad game, they're screwed. They need to get to a space where if he has a bad game, they still have other ways that they could potentially win. Because otherwise, teams are eventually going to figure out in key spots how to turn off Russ's burners, and the Seahawks are going to be largely a non-factor.